It's 3 a.m. You're lying in bed staring at the ceiling, and your eyes feel like they're made of sandpaper. You've tried counting sheep. You've tried that breathing trick your friend swore by. You've even tried reading the most boring document you could find on your phone. Nothing works. Now imagine that feeling never goes away. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever again. What actually happens to a human body and mind that never gets to sleep? And how long would you really last? Because here's the thing, the answer isn't just you'd feel really tired, it's way stranger, and honestly way darker than most people expect. This isn't a hypothetical dreamed up for shock value either. There are real documented cases of this happening to real people, and what happens to them will change the way you think about that one more episode decision you make at midnight. Let's start with the basics. Sleep math. You spend roughly a third of your entire life unconscious, which when you say it out loud, sounds almost absurd. Why would evolution build a creature that has to shut down completely, lose awareness of predators, stop defending itself for 8 hours a day? That's not a small design flaw, that's a massive vulnerability. And yet every complex animal we've ever studied does it. Even animals that seem like they shouldn't be able to afford it, like dolphins, have figured out a workaround, sleeping with half their brain at a time, so the other half can keep them breathing and watching for danger. The fact that evolution never found a way to eliminate sleep entirely in billions of years across millions of species tells you something. It tells you sleep isn't a bug, it's mandatory maintenance, and when you skip it, the bill comes due. So what actually happens if you try to skip it completely? The first 24 hours, this part you might recognize. Your reaction time slows down to something comparable to being legally drunk. A study often cited from the University of South Australia found that being awake for about 17 to 19 hours produces impairment similar to a blood alcohol level around 0.05. Stay awake to 24 hours, and you're functioning like someone well over the legal driving limit. Your judgment gets worse, but, and this is the cruel part, your ability to notice your judgment getting worse also gets worse. You feel oddly fine, even a little wired, right as you're making decisions you'd never make rested. Day 2 is where it stops being relatable and starts being unsettling. Your body starts fighting back hard. Microsleeps begin, tiny involuntary lapses where your brain just switches off for 1 to 10 seconds at a time without your permission. You might be standing up, talking, even driving, and your brain quietly clocks out for a few seconds and you won't even know it happened. Cortisol spikes. Your hands start to shake. Some people start experiencing minor hallucinations at the edges of their vision, a shadow that moves wrong, a shape that isn't there. This isn't some Hollywood exaggeration. It's a documented, measurable neurological response to sleep deprivation, and it's your brain sending up increasingly desperate flares. By day 3, the hallucinations get worse and stop staying at the edges. In the famous case of Randy Gardner, a California teenager who in 1964 stayed awake for about 11 days straight as part of a science fair experiment supervised by sleep researchers, he began having trouble with basic object recognition. At one point, he mistook a street sign for a person. His mood swung wildly. His memory started failing him mid-sentence, and this was a healthy 17-year-old with researchers watching his vitals the entire time, not someone with an underlying condition making it worse. Here's the promise I made you at the top, and I want you to actually sit with this for a second. Because everything I just described, the shaking, the microsleeps, the hallucinations, that's just from someone who chose to stay awake, and could at any point just close their eyes and end the experiment. What happens when a person physically cannot sleep, no matter how badly they want to, is a completely different and much darker story. And that's not science fiction. That's a real medical condition, and it's the part of this video that's going to stick with you, the disease that never lets you sleep. There's a rare genetic disorder called fatal familial insomnia. It affects a tiny handful of families worldwide, and it does exactly what the name says. It progressively destroys the part of the brain called the thalamus, which normally regulates the transition into deep sleep, until the person can no longer enter that state at all. Not sleeps badly, not wakes up a lot, simply cannot get there. Researchers who've studied the condition, including teams publishing through outlets connected to the University of Bologna, where much of the foundational documentation on this disease originated, have tracked its progression across the people who develop it, and it is horrifying in its predictability. It starts with insomnia and panic attacks, then hallucinations, then rapid weight loss and a kind of accelerated aging. Eventually, the person enters a state that isn't quite awake and isn't quite asleep, a permanent, exhausted twilight before the disease ultimately proves fatal, typically within 8 to 30 months of the first symptoms. I'm not telling you this to scare you about your genetics. This disease is astronomically rare. I'm telling you this because it's the closest real-world proof we have of the actual question this video is asking. It shows us in the most extreme and tragic way possible that sleep isn't optional scheduling. It's structural. Take it away completely and permanently and the body doesn't just get tired, it starts to come apart. So let's go back to rats for a second, because this is where it gets even stranger, picking up exactly where we left off. Long before anyone studied fatal familial insomnia in humans, researchers at the University of Chicago ran a series of experiments in the 1980s, led by a researcher named Alan Rechtschaffen, using a setup called the disk over water method. Rats were kept awake using a rotating platform that would tip them into water if they fell asleep. And the results were brutal. Every single rat in the fully sleep-deprived group died, usually within 2 to 3 weeks. What's strange is what killed them. It wasn't some single catastrophic organ failure. Their body temperature regulation broke down. Their metabolism spiked wildly, burning through calories even while they ate more. Their immune systems collapsed, leaving them vulnerable to infections. A healthy rat would have shrugged off. Basically, without sleep, their bodies lost the ability to maintain themselves as a coherent system. Sleep, it turns out, isn't just rest for the brain. It's more like the nightly systems check that keeps every other system in the body from quietly falling apart. Which brings us to the part of this video where things get uncomfortable. Here's the uncomfortable part. We like to treat sleep like a luxury we can trade away. One more Netflix episode, one more scroll, one more hour of work, we'll catch up on sleep later. On the weekend, on vacation eventually. But everything we've just walked through says, that's not really how sleep works. You can't bank it. You can't fully repay a debt like that. A 2016 study out of the University of Colorado Boulder found that even a full weekend of catch-up sleep failed to reverse the metabolic damage caused by a week of short sleep during the workweek. The body remembered the debt. Multiply that pattern across years, and you're not looking at an occasional bad night. You're looking at a slow, cumulative erosion. One that's been linked in long-term population studies to higher risks of heart disease, impaired immune function, and cognitive decline. The scary part isn't the dramatic version, the 11-day experiment, or the ultra-rare fatal disease. The scary part is the quiet, socially acceptable version so many of us are already running, as a background process, one skipped hour at a time. And here's the part that gets stranger the more you sit with it. Sleep isn't just maintenance for the body. It's when your brain does something it can't do while you're awake. It clears out waste. Researchers at the University of Rochester, in work led by neuroscientist Maiken Nedergaard around 2013, identified something called the glymphatic system, a kind of internal plumbing that flushes metabolic waste out of the brain, including a protein called beta amyloid, the same protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. This flushing happens dramatically faster during sleep than while you're awake, which means every single night, your brain isn't just resting, it's running a cleanup crew through its own hallways, sweeping out the debris from the day. Skip that. Night after night, and the debris just keeps accumulating. So let's go back to you, lying there at 3 a.m., staring at that ceiling. That moment you pictured at the start of this video, the sandpaper eyes, the racing thoughts, the sheer frustration of a body that won't shut off. That's not just an inconvenience. That's your body politely reminding you that it has non-negotiable maintenance to run, and it will not be skipped indefinitely. The teenager who stayed awake for 11 days recovered, eventually, after his brain and body forced the issue and pulled him back under. The rats never got that chance. The families carrying the gene for fatal familial insomnia don't get that chance either, and that's precisely what makes their story so haunting. It's a glimpse of what happens when the one system built into every complex animal on Earth is simply switched off, with no way to switch it back on. Maybe that's the real answer to the question this video opened with. You couldn't just never sleep again. Not really. Something would eventually break, quietly and then not so quietly, until sleep either forced its way back in or the body gave out trying to survive without it. Which means every night you do get to close your eyes and actually go under isn't just some throwaway biological chore. It's your brain and body getting a rare, precious chance to do the one kind of repair work they can't do any other way. So tonight, when you're lying there at 3 a.m., annoyed that you can't fall asleep, maybe don't be so annoyed. Somewhere, that frustration is the sound of a system that still works, still fights for what it needs, still refuses to let you take it away completely. The real question isn't what would happen if you could never sleep again. It's what's quietly happening to you, right now, every single time you decide you'd rather not.